Financial planning and security can sometimes be seen as a moving target. The rules change constantly, and you need guidance to stay ahead of the market moves. This is the Lebenthal Report with Michael Hartzman and Dominic Tavella. We'll break down the news, trends, and overall direction of the markets, telling you what may be coming next, investment opportunities, and what to avoid. Now, here are your hosts, Dominic Tavella and Michael Hartzman.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman. Today is Tuesday, May 24th, and I'm on, as always, with my partner, Dominic Tavella. How are you, Dom?
Doing great, Mike. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you. Same to you. So, Dom, we have a great show tonight, but we're going to kick it off talking about the market like we always do. And the last week, 2 weeks, the market, a lot of experts would say the market has not capitulated yet because there hasn't been that one dreadful day. But the market last week did tip into bear territory. The S&P 500 finally was down 20%. It broke through that briefly. The NASDAQ's down about 30. So it's still ugly. I don't know if we have to have that one god-awful day, but, the market has not been a sight to behold for quite a while now.
Yeah, Mike, it's been a brutal year. It's really testing people's patience and resolve. And I know technically maybe we didn't close in a bear market, but when you have over half the stocks in the S&P 500 down over 20%, with the amount that are down 30 and 40 and 50, is the number is just countless. It's been a rough year, right? And it's all about this the markets deciding at what point the Federal Reserve overdoes it and puts us into a recession or gives us a soft landing. And the argument is endless and daily.
Look, for me, it's also just been a bombardment of generally bad news, whether it's the war in Ukraine, continued shutdowns in China because of COVID, which honestly, we hardly talk about anymore here. It seems here in the US, people are resigned for the most part to getting back to their lives. Or when will this consumer price index, the CPI, cool off to give investors and consumers an idea that the Fed is being successful in putting a lid on inflation? And then, Dominic, we could start worrying about a recession. But first, we got to put a lid on inflation to at least show that the Fed has got their handle on this.
Yeah, the right now, and this is part of that mentality. And we witnessed it a year ago where no matter what the news was that came out, it was interpreted in a positive way. Even today, when we get good news, it just kind of gets swept under the rug. It doesn't matter. That was yesterday's noise. It's not going to be tomorrow. But I think you're spot on, Mike. I think over the next couple of months, I hope over the next couple of months, we do get this topping out process in inflation, and maybe perhaps third, fourth quarter, we get a little bit of a rollover, and maybe the markets, people can start feeling a little bit better. But you're not feeling good. Every day you go and fill up your gas, or you go out to dinner, or you go to pick up something at the stores. You're not feeling good right now about inflation and where it's going.
And even the supply chain part of it, that's real. I went to the Apple store I needed a new notebook computer. My notebook computer is over 10 years old. It's time to get a refresh. And I'm so accustomed to walking into the Apple store and walking out with whatever I want that, the salesperson said, all right, so this is on back order. You could have it in mid-July. And I was shocked. I was like, mid-July? So yeah, we can't get them. We just can't get the parts. We can't get these things built.
Mike, I brought it up on our earlier meeting. There's a very large tech company that has enough back orders that if they could actually get the material from Shanghai, if we can get the product into their factories and out to the consumers, we'll have a record-breaking year sales and profits. All they need to do is get the product into their warehouses. And this is where we're stuck, right? And the economy is stuck. And so look, I appreciate the Federal Reserve is trying to do their best here, but they have to be really careful what the root causes are of this inflation, and stepping on the brake too hard will put us into a recession. So this is going to be some really careful dancing by the Fed not to screw this up.
Right, because I spoke to clients, you spoke to clients who've already said to me, they're putting their home improvement on hold. They're not taking that extra trip. They're going to hold on to their car a little while longer because they want to hold on to their cash.
And look, Mike, I'm glad you're up to consumer. The consumer is healthy. We heard from the president of JP Morgan Chase and Bank America, both saying that deposits and credit and lending is really very healthy. So this talk about going into recession, highly, highly unlikely this year. But the consumer is definitely adjusting their behavior, how, where, when they spend their money, and that will at the very least slow the economy down. So again, I come back to what the Fed does and how it reacts. And the only real concern I do have is that they've been off the mark so far all of last year. I hope to God they don't over tighten too quickly going forward. I think they should let the stew simmer for a little while and let things come back down to earth.
Agreed. And we've beaten this, we talked about that ad nauseum a year ago, and they were talking about inflation being transitory, and they could not have missed the mark.
It could not have been more wrong, Mike. And not that you and I are all that smart, but we were living and breathing it, and so were our clients. Today, I think we're living and breathing the opposite, where clients are adjusting their spending habits. I don't think the Fed's aware of it just yet.
Well, hopefully they catch on quickly. Dom, tonight, I'm just going to switch gears. I apologize. Tonight, we're going to do a show that you and I have been trying to do for a long, long time. We finally got someone on tonight who we feel could really speak to it. We're going to talk about financial fraud and financial scams and elder abuse when it comes to elderly people, and not even elderly people. Anyone could really fall victim to a scam or an email that's just bogus and have their money stolen. Unfortunately, these crooks do target elderly people. Tonight we have Ron Roel, who's an old friend of ours, locally here on Long Island. People will recognize his name. He was a writer for Newsday for decades. He has a podcast now on Voice America, like we do, called Ron's 45 Forward. And I'm really looking forward to getting his input and to teaching our clients steps they can take to avoid falling easily victims to some of these scams.
Really important subject matter, and considering a vast majority of our clients are I hate the word elderly, but a little, I would say, you're in my age bracket. This is really important subject matter.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. The older I get, the more I dislike that word. But with that, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Ron Roel, the host of Ron's 45.
Now, back to the Lebenthal Report.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner, Dominic Tavella, and our special guest this evening, Ron Roel, the host of Ron's 45 radio show, which could be heard on our network, Voice America, at 3 p.m. Eastern Time every Monday. Good evening, Ron. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Hey, thanks to Dom and Michael. Glad to be here.
Thank you. As we sit on the open, Ron, and as you and I talked about a week or two ago, Dom and I feel this is a really important topic for us to cover. We have prevented clients in the past being victims of financial fraud. They call us and something looks fishy to them. Unfortunately, we don't always get that phone call, and we find out after that clients have been victims of it. Spoof email, phone calls. Let's just start from 30,000 feet and want you to describe some of the various ways, Ron, that people could fall victim to these very sophisticated scams.
Sure, Michael. Yeah, it's a really it's a tough problem. People, I guess having gone through COVID, the word endemic or pandemic is become endemic. And that is unfortunately the situation, that it really has become a fabric of our life that we have to contend with, because we're just, increasingly, you know, in this hybrid life, face to face and digital. And a lot of this is happening digitally, or through, as you mentioned, emails, phone calls, and now increasingly texts, are part of this whole scene. And, it's really tragic in a way. And you guys, you're working every week, or every day to help people, increase their portfolios, preserve their portfolios, plan for retirement. And these guys have nothing except, an intent to part you from your money. And they're very sophisticated. They have a tremendous, capacity to, the skills as almost customer service representatives. They get you on the phone. They have ways of replicating website appearances and emails, so that it's very difficult to detect. And you and I talked before, Michael, you can detect it, but you have to stop a second and pause and stop your impulses from doing that, because your first impulse is like, oh, that's interesting. Like, no, don't press that. Do not hit that link.
Mhm.
And it's tough. As we were talking, as the show began, it's also difficult to diagnose the problem, because these scammers and in some places criminals. I mean, some of these are organized crime rings, actually, international crime rings. They're very good at targeting the most vulnerable, right? And in many cases, it's seniors, it's older people. And why is that? Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. One is they may not be as technologically savvy, but I think also, as we've seen from this pandemic, there's been an epidemic of loneliness. So seniors, when they get these phone calls, they pick up, and it's a voice at the other end of the line, and it's often a very friendly voice, a very trusting voice. So they answer them and they engage in conversation, and they want to please this person. So that's one reason. So they're easier targets in general.
So Ron, I'm going to interrupt you real quick,
Yeah,
because that's
absolutely.
one of my points I wanted to ask about. Hasn't COVID actually made this worse? And I don't mean the virus itself, but the fact that we were all shuttered and people started using technology that they were never used to using or had never used before. And I got my 80-year-old something mom a smartphone for the first time ever, right? So she can do video chats. I mean, isn't it that a lot of people started using technology they just never used before?
I believe you're exactly right, Tom. And so they started using it, and some of it is easy enough to use. So that's that old phrase, just having just enough knowledge to be dangerous. So you basically use it, but you're not sophisticated enough to know how you can be manipulated using this technology. So yeah, and I think unfortunately, people realize after the fact, right? So then something happens to you, and this is another point you folks have mentioned with me, right? Which is that the embarrassment factor. So you've been scammed. In some cases, it could be thousands of dollars, and now you're just too embarrassed to tell your family, your friends. You just don't want to admit it, because you're embarrassed, and also because you're afraid that people start thinking that, this person should no longer be independent. Um, and it's not that they shouldn't be independent, but they do need counsel. They do, and all of us need counsel in some ways. So it's not something that we should be embarrassed by, but it's something that we should be. There should be much more vigilance and much more, education really about what these potential scams are.
Ryan, you mentioned in the notes you sent me over before the show, to that point, is a lot of elderly people they cherish their independence, right? They cherish the ability to pay their own bills, to live independent, and if they're afraid, if they go to their children and say they've been a victim of this, then the children will now paint them into a corner and start to slowly remove that independence. And you raised an interesting point that that's another reason why many of these crimes go unreported.
Right, right. And what makes it, tricky, Michael, is that, as I've mentioned to you, so there are two kinds of predators. There's essentially outside predators, but then the trickier part, which probably we won't get into too much in this program, but we should be aware of, is the inside predators, families and friends and unscrupulous advisors. So sometimes what happens is as if you get scammed on the outside, people start to suspect your competence, but then they start taking control of your assets. And that could be equally dangerous, where you have insiders who are also taking advantage of elderly people, and sometimes even taking over their identity. So it compounds the problem.
So Ron, you make an interesting point. Dominic and I have both gotten these phone calls.
Mhm.
Hey, I'm Mary's first cousin. She's not doing well, and she's in the hospital. I need you to send me $10,000. I mean,
Right.
I get that phone call a couple of times a year, and well, if I can't speak to Mary, and if you don't have a power of attorney, I'm not sending out a dime. But you raise a valid point, because frequently a lot of these incidences are from the inside out, right, Dom?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up, Mike, because we see a lot of the outside ones where somebody gets the fake email or the phone call. But I think that probably the most troubling ones that we've seen, Ron, is where it's their own child, right? Perhaps they have a drug problem or a gambling problem, and they go into mom, I need this, I need that. And at some point, maybe mom suspects what's going on, or dad, but we get the phone call either directly from the child, and as Mike said, well, I'm not talking to you, and or from mom, I need an extra, $50,000. You're like, well, wait a minute, that's not a pattern I've witnessed for the last 20 years. What's going on, right?
Right.
And it's not unusual, I've learned, to know that it's a family member, it's a relative, it's a caretaker that is influencing the individual to maybe give them a little bit more than would be wise.
Right. So that's why it's important, for people to recognize, when they're dealing with honorable people like you guys, that they need to put in security controls, even with respect to their family. Like, who has authority to make decisions? And that conversation should be with you guys without family members initially,
Mhm.
so that that you're hearing it from them, and should their capacities diminish, that you have in writing, who's authorized to make decisions, and that you can, push back against family members saying, what, not authorized to do that. I want to hear that from your parent themselves. Obviously, in some cases, it can be still dicey, right? There may be under undue influence. So you guys are
Mhm.
aware of that too. But at least there are some controls. And that's important because, as you guys know, money does funny things to people, and it makes them manipulative and greedy and uncharitable toward their family members in ways that you find astonishing, but it happens.
I'm glad you said that, because we do have a form that we have clients fill out when they become clients, and we actually send it annually. Has your designated person changed, or do you want to nominate a designated person? So you're right, that's really important. Just switching gears for a second, could you briefly describe some of the more common scams or spoofs that you've seen?
Sure, sure. So one of the big areas is identity theft, and that basically is stealing, what people refer to as, PII, your personally identifiable information. So people will go in, and sometimes they can even do it, you know, the old-fashioned way. They can go in your mailbox and steal your mail, and basically, start diverting information to for their own purposes. So, they're just stealing your identity. in order to basically siphon off your assets. So, it can happen, with respect to your credit cards. You can often, what happens is that you'll notice things in your credit reports or your credit card statements where there's small incremental, amounts that are charged that, sort of go underneath the radar. If you don't check them, they'll go unchecked, or they'll be, fraudulent, charges, which you didn't make at all. So you need to really check your credit card statements every month to make sure there's nothing on there that you can, is not legitimate. Sometimes what will happen is they'll steal your information for the purposes of loans. So you all of a sudden, if you try to get say a home equity loan, your credit will be denied. You're like, wait a minute, what's happened? And I have actually a friend who's who one of the difficulties is that sometimes there's a lag time in realizing this, right? So they will steal your identity, and you won't really find out for several months. This friend of mine got caught in an incredible scam where this person had, or a couple, there's the FBI is investigating at this point, had basically stole their identity, opened up an account, in another part of the state, in their name, and began, had replicated their driver's license, their social security information, to create an entirely different entity, in the bank's eyes. And it took them a denial of a credit report, a credit request, for them to realize what had happened. So that's one big area, is identity theft. They're literally stealing your information to siphon off your assets. Another one that you mentioned, Michael, earlier, is the idea of spoofing. So basically, the caller claims that they're coming from some other source. Often they pick something like their social security representative saying, you're you haven't made payments, they're owed payments. In some cases, they will actually divert you to police departments claiming to be your,
Ron, that we've had clients that they say they've gotten calls from the IRS.
Correct.
That seems to be a popular one out there.
Yeah, and that's one that is pretty, is pretty obvious one if you do some research, which is that the IRS will say, we never call people. So as soon as you get a call from the IRS, no, you're not the IRS. They never call people. But again, these guys are really, they'll say, hold on a second, and they'll switch you over, and they can actually create a caller ID that purports to be from an agency or from a police department. But the police departments, IRS, government agencies, they never call you. They don't do that. A similar kind of spoofing is that you guys, I'm sure, have heard of a lot, is the grandparent getting calls from a purported grandchild or nephew or niece saying they're in dire need of money. Yeah, we need $10,000. I'm in a jam. I mean, those are more common than you think, and really, again, tugs on the heartstrings of seniors. The last one I'll mention for now is just the lottery scams, the sweepstakes scams, right? Where they basically get you to hit this link, and that's not. They're basically trying to get you in to get your information, to get you to give them your bank accounts, your social security numbers, in order for you to supposedly get this windfall. So I never hit those links. I'm like, as Michael pointed, it's so tempting. Like, wow, okay, well, maybe, no, don't hit it.
Yeah,
And Ron, you already mentioned this, but when you get that email, right, it looks like it's coming from your bank, right? Or it looks like it's coming from a government agency, Social Security Administration. You really have to you have to look really hard to try to pick off where something is misspelled or the language in the letter is not quite proper English. I mean, there are telltales, but it's hard.
It is. It is. And often the tell is in the email address. If it's supposedly coming from a bank, if you don't see the bank's, at, whatever, capital1.com or whatever the bank is, it's got some other, ending to the email. Nope, that's not the legitimate bank. But it's hard to detect otherwise. It is.
Ron, we are bumping up against a break. You being a Voice America veteran, you know what this is all about. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come right back and talk about ways to prevent some of these scams from happening.
Sounds great.
We'll be right back.
Now, back to the Lebenthal Report.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with my partner Dominic Tavella, and our guest this evening, the host of Voice America's Ron 45 Forward, which can be heard every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over Voice America, just like our show. You mentioned, Ron, people falling for the I'll call it the grandpa scam.
Mhm.
And my dad was this close. It happened to be the day after we came back from a family vacation, and my dad gets a phone call. He says, "Grandpa, this is Scott, who's the name of my son."
Mhm.
It said, "I'm in Spain. I've been arrested. Don't tell Dad. He's gonna be really pissed off. And I need you to send $5,000 to bail me out." And he's gonna be a grandpa. He's not gonna tell me. And he starts looking for his wallet. And my mom says, "Who's that?" He goes, "Oh, it's Scott. It's fine. I got it under control. He's in a little bit of trouble in Spain, and I'm gonna get him out of trouble." And my mother said, "Hang up the phone. Like, he's not. I guarantee you, he's not in Spain. They're just getting home from a trip. Just hang up the phone." But my dad was, minutes away from giving these people his credit card to get his only grandson out of trouble.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, their manner is so sincere
Mhm.
that it really, these people are very sophisticated in terms of, fraudulent customer service. They know how to get to you. And, you say, well, let me speak to Scott, or, what's your number? Let me call you back,
Right.
and see what happens, and sometimes, they're sophisticated enough that they can, they can divert it to a number that sounds legitimate. But, you have to speak directly with your relatives. Yeah, that
Right.
it's very
Well, that was the
common.
thing. This guy made believe he was actually my son, his grandson.
Yeah.
But my dad at the time, may he rest in peace, was in his mid 80s.
Right.
And he got frazzled. He just wanted to help his grandson.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
just switching gears for a second. We talk frequently about ransomware,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds very ominous. Doesn't sound like anything good could come from that. So why don't we talk a little bit about ransomware, what it is, where do how do you know it's happening to you, and how do we prevent it?
Right. Well, yeah, ransomware has been in the news a few times, and it's sort of at different levels. So there are some sophisticated crime rings that work through the dark web to basically target often corporations. They will go for the money. So in these cases, probably not for many of your viewers, but they will they'll go after a corporation, and they will hack into their system, and they basically seize control of the system and basically threaten to basically destroy the system unless the company is willing to pay, often several $1,000,000. So the FBI has gotten involved in a number of these cases. And in some cases, the companies don't want the publicity. Once again, the embarrassment, in the financial markets. So they'll pay the ransom, And so in this cases, the company, the criminals are just they're going for the money. They want to get the money. And it's rare that they really want to control the company's systems. There's some cases in where people will, not for ransomware, but you'll find, and I've had this too. People will try to hack into your system, and they will want to control your system because what they want to do is basically send out thousands of spam emails from your computer, have it come from your computer. And so I've had situations.
I've had clients call me up because they claim that the software company that does the protection needs to update their system, and they'll let them in. They'll give them the password to their computer, and next thing you know, as you said, they end up taking over that person's computer. So the key here is, if it sounds fishy at all, if it doesn't sound absolutely kosher, the right answer is don't do it unless you get confirmation from a second, third, fourth source that it's legit.
Right. And sometimes too, people can, it doesn't even require your approvals. So this is where your security systems are really important. If you have software and you don't update your software, these folks will basically randomly, scroll the internet looking for people who have your software system and haven't updated your system. And then they'll look for leaks in your system where they can come in and take control of it. So they might want to take control of your system so they can send out thousands of emails to people, spam emails, and it comes from your computer. And what happens is that then your platform will, your host will call you up and say, we're shutting down your system. Because, people are getting spammed by you. But in other cases, guys, people will, so they're not looking for huge amounts of money. What they're looking for is large amounts of small money, small donors, if you will. And I'll just give you an example of the way this works, where you're not even aware that you're being held for ransom. So one day I was actually looking for information about one of my high school classmates who, unfortunately, was in an accident in Chicago, and I just wanted to see if I could find out more about what happened to her. And I'm not sure what I hit, but I hit something in one of these websites, and I got an alarm on my computer saying, "Your system has been hacked. Don't shut it off. If you try to shut it off, everything will be shut down. You lose all your files. Blah blah blah." Well, of course, that's exactly what I should have done, but I didn't. It had a handy number there to call to fix the problem. So again, as Michael has mentioned, you think, okay, well, maybe this will fix it, and so there's a, temporary suspension of disbelief. I call the number, and they're gonna, okay, well, no, don't worry, Mr. Royal, we'll fix it. We got this. It won't be that, the fee will be reasonable. It'll be like $400, but we'll fix it. We'll go in your computer. We'll fix it all, blah, blah, blah. And, as you go along, and I gave them, I forget, I think I gave them access to my bank account. Again, really? I did that? Yeah. But again, they're going to fix your problem. They're going to save your computer. And then, of course, about 15 minutes in, I realized this is the guy who's hacking my computer that I'm talking to. And so I managed to, freeze my bank account. He didn't get any money and so forth. But, this is, so they try to work in, in small amounts or thousands of people. So that's another way that they'll work. They're not going for the big corporate hit, but they are going for the small, consumer contributors, and again, I don't think that he had any control of my computer, but I let him in, so that's where, in those cases, again, the ransomware requires you to give approval in some cases, but it can be very quick, and it happens very, very subtly.
Ron, what are the more obvious alarm bells that should be going off when you see something? What are the more obvious ones?
Well, I think, as you guys mentioned before, if it seems too good to be true, it's not true. So if there are sweepstakes, or if there are, another one is,
a gold mine in Zaire is not likely to be.
Not likely, right. one of the telltale signs, Dom, is that, people call you with stuff, and it's the, the fast sell, the sense of urgency. You got to do this, and in ways borrowing, the techniques of advertisers, right? You see ads on TV, you're like, oh, this is going to be a sale, but you got to hurry. You got to hurry. If you're not hurrying, you're going to miss the deal. So it's that sense of false urgency that they get you to really make a decision. If there's any pressure, don't do it. If they're just phone calls, numbers you don't recognize, don't answer them. If it's somebody who really wants to get in touch with you, they'll leave a message or they'll call you back. Don't pick it up. If you start listening to a phone call, don't worry about being uncivil. Just hang up. Don't say, "Oh, I'm Lisa."
Can we just spend a moment on that one, Ron? Because so many times, like, well, I didn't want to be rude, right? So I listened to the phone call, and like, no, they're trying to steal from you. You can be rude. You're allowed.
Right. I did not call you. You called me. I didn't ask you to call me. Hang up. So don't answer numbers, and often just block numbers. Again, if it's really legitimate, they'll find a way to you. And often, I think a lot of these cases are phone calls from companies who never call people. So I guess one of the recent hot scams is from Amazon, right? So that's one of them where people, pretend they're Amazon customer representatives, and Amazon has actually sent, I'm an Amazon Prime client, and they've actually sent emails to people with a checklist of don't do this, we don't do this, don't answer that, because Amazon, UPS, these customer service representatives claiming that you're owed money, and you're like, no, stop. You know what? Let me call you back. What's your number? So you have, you don't, let anybody pressure you into making decisions.
But Ron, to your point, does what's your number even work, or are you better off going to the Amazon website and using that 800 number? Because I'm sure that these, criminals could give you a number that, you're calling them right back.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, in most cases, go directly to the website.
Right.
Amazon recommends, in their case, go to our website, go to your Amazon app. Some of the things also is that, people ask you for your debit card. When in doubt, use your credit card. Debit cards gives people access to, your bank accounts, whereas, credit cards have limited, defenses. They can't, you'll be able to get your money back generally from if they're using a credit card fraudulently. One of the ways also is that, again, for a lot of us, I still get a lot of us, get a lot of statements, written statements. When you're done with those written statements, shred them. Don't throw them out, shred them, because people will, I do know a case of locally where, a woman, had mail being stolen out of her mailbox, and increasingly, even though, we worry about digital theft, in many cases, setting up payments directly online through your vendors or your customers or your, is often more secure because it goes directly to their sites.
Ron, we have a few minutes left. I just want to stress, maybe have you stress the importance of actually reporting something if it's happened to you. According to the FBI, 92,000 seniors got scammed last year. I think that number is so low compared to the real number out there, because as Mike mentioned earlier, some people are embarrassed to mention it whether it's the law authority or their children. Stress the importance of just telling somebody that this happened to you, so maybe you prevent it from happening to somebody else.
Absolutely, Dom. I couldn't reinforce that enough. And there are several ways you can do this. I mean, there are a couple of there is the ARP Fraud Watch Network, okay, where you can, if you just, go to ARP, .org and search for Fraud Watch Network. You can report frauds. They have people actually who can help you try to unravel the mess. There are other, there's the Identity Theft Resource Center, idtheftcenter.org. Again, you can call or email them, and they can give you help. They can, when you report things, they can also try to give you help to figure out what to do next. The FTC, ftc.gov, they have resources there. And then there's the National Center on Elder Abuse, ncea.acl.gov. So these are all resources where you can report, even if you're not sure, if you're suspected, you can call them. There's no penalty for reporting when you think you've gotten scammed. And then also, tell people like you guys, your financial advisors, they've got it's important that people know your advisors, your elder law attorneys, your accountants, let people know, have a group of people around you that can help protect you, and don't be afraid to ask them for help.
So Ron, I guess the other takeaways are, don't be embarrassed. Don't think this only happens to you. Don't be afraid to be rude. Hang up on the person. If you think the person's full of crap, they probably are. And you just have to start, if you have the capacity, to be your own advocate. And if that first line defense fails, you got to go to the second line defense. Like you said, people like us, agencies, the police, loved ones, just you cannot feel like you have to fight this fight by yourself.
A terrific summary, Michael.
Couldn't have said it better, Mike.
Thanks, guys. Well, on that note, Ron, we can't thank you enough for being on. And listen to Ron's show every Monday at 3 p.m. on
Right.
Voice America. Ron,
Right.
It was good to see you, and thanks for being a guest tonight.
Ron, thanks. Hopefully we help some people tonight.
I hope so. And thank you guys so much for having the show.
.com. Now, back to the Lebenthal Report.
All right, I'm Michael Hartzman, back with Dominic Tavella for a quick wrap up. Dom, we were trying to do that show for a while. I think we finally found the right guy, and really, brought a lot of information about a really important topic.
Yeah, Mike, it's bad enough that we're dealing with the markets and volatility and the ups and downs, to think that, especially one of our clients, people that we know, that they get ripped off. That's really a gut punch, and one of the things we didn't talk about with Ron was, and I know your office does it all the time, we get to know our clients, we get to know their voices, we know them on a first name basis. And I think more important, we get to know their spending habits. And so when something doesn't smell right, and I would tell that to our clients, if they get a phone call or if they get an email, if it doesn't look, smell right, just turn it down, just walk away, right? The smell test really does count in this game.
Yeah, it does. And also, you have to be really careful on where you roam around on the internet, because if you run into one of those websites where you're taking a quiz or you're looking at trivia, that might be the doorway to letting someone into your computer. And if you're wondering, well, how is someone going to get to my email? Well, again, if you're on these websites that you wind up by accident, you could easily, let a bug or a virus into that computer, and they can get all your information. So you have to be careful where you're roaming around as well. Yeah,
there's a lot of telltales, signs that look, once you figure them out, they kind of look obvious. But when you're in the middle of it, and Ron brought it up where he thought his computer was getting hacked and he called and asked for help, and at some point the alarm bells went off, right? But hopefully in the case of our clients, whoever's listening, that the alarm bells go off early. And what's the worst that can happen? That you call that person back, or that person calls you back. get confirmation that it's legit. Whatever they're talking about, whether it's, God forbid, somebody's injured, they need money, or something's wrong with your computer, we're going to fix it for you. Hey, well, get confirmation and then go ahead with the transaction if it's legit.
Yeah, and the computer one, Dom, more often than not, you could talk to a computer expert, and if you're having trouble with the computer, what do they tell you to do? Turn it off and turn it back on, right? So if it's something as simple as that, and if that happens, the chances are whatever that alarm or whatever you think just happened to your computer, and I'm no IT specialist, but there's a good chance that will go away when you turn your computer back on.
Mike, it's the most obvious steps. How many times do you get an email from a client? We get an email, please send me X amount of dollars, right? It's standard operating procedure. We pick up the phone and we call them. And we get a voice confirmation. We know who the people are. They go, yeah, I sent you the email. Sure, you didn't need to call me. Yes, we do. It's how we confirm that it was you and that you actually requested the funds be sent to you. So sometimes just that little extra step, right, of confirming that the transaction, the email, the call is legit, that could probably knock out half of these fraudulent transactions.
Right. And the other half, as we said earlier, the other half could be knocked out just as easily by just being rude, right? Don't worry about offending anyone, because if you're really worried about it, even if it's legitimate, that person who you're potentially offending, they will understand. And even if they don't, that's not your problem.
Look, I think everybody's aware that at least we're living in this world where people are just trying to rip you off. And I've had it happen, Mike, where I get the phone call and we need this. Like, how do I know who you are? I don't mean to be rude, but how do I know who you are? And they'll say, call me back. Call our customer service department, at the phone numbers on the website, right? So they're used to, the legitimate people are used to people questioning them. They're not, if it's legit, they're not going to be upset that you're questioning them. They're going to actually appreciate that you're taking the extra step.
Exactly. Couldn't agree with you more. So listen, on that note, we are out of time for this evening. We will be back next week. And Don, was a good show tonight.
Yep. Hopefully we did some good, Mike, even if it just sets off a little alarm bell for somebody the next time. If we prevented one person, one client of ours from getting scammed, then it was worth the time. And hopefully we did more than that.
Absolutely. And furthermore, Dom, if any of our clients or anyone listening to the show has any questions, they could feel free to give us a call and we could always go into more detail.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.